What do you say, folks? I don't know what to say about this one. This one's, wow, what do we say? So it's been 2 weeks since the New York Post put an article out there, and Twitter went on a censorship rage and blocked the New York Post article, one of the nation's oldest newspapers, founded by Alexander Hamilton, over 200 years old, the fourth highest circulation paper in the country, I believe. And the Twitter, a juvenile young platform, chose to censor the content on spurious basis that it violated their terms of service. Yeah, okay. The argument that they made was that they had published hacked material. Now, how Twitter would possibly know it's hacked material when this is a breaking news story is beyond me. But we saw today, ladies and gentlemen, on the 28th of October, 2020, one Jack Dorsey, the person who runs Twitter, testifying with his idiotic nose ring in front of the Senate via Zoom. You know, it's the Wuhan coronavirus, COVID-19, the cool thing to do. Zoom or WebEx or whatever it was. One of those, but telecommuting to have this conversation. And Jack Dorsey, grilled by Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, former candidate for president of the United States. Texas's conservative Senator Ted Cruz grilled him about Twitter's policy. And Jack Dorsey had the audacity to say that the New York Post violated the terms of service for Twitter. Well, I'm here to tell you that Twitter violates the terms of service for America, and they do it on a repeated basis. It's time to repeal their protection under past legislation that was intended to spark growth in social media and the internet by protecting content holders from the content created by content creators. When a company like Twitter can selectively censor in order to spew a narrative that suits their desires, they don't deserve that protection. They don't deserve the protection. I've said that before on the channel. They do not deserve it. Twitter and Facebook do not deserve the protections that they're given under this law, and it should be rescinded, or they should be investigated for antitrust basis or for their monopoly position that they have. It's utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. Dorsey, with a straight face, saying when Ted Cruz asked him why they did it, they said it's because they put original hacked material. How they determine it's hacked material is beyond me. But what about the Twitter not censoring the publication of the New York Times story, which was a violation of federal law, as I pointed out when it occurred, when purported tax returns from Donald Trump were published by the New York Times. They actually put screenshots of his actual tax returns onto Twitter. Did Twitter censor that? No, they did not. They allowed all that to go. Now, what's interesting in the grilling of Ted Cruz of Jack Dorsey is the focus, of course, was on the New York Post article, because that's the reason Jack Dorsey has been hauled in front of the Senate. And with good reason. With good reason. He enjoys protections that have been granted to him by the U.S. Congress, signed into law by a past president. And so when they abuse those protections by censoring other people's content, when they themselves are protected from what those other people say, it is an interesting situation. So Ted Cruz asked him about this, but then Ted Cruz points out the obvious, that Twitter had no issue with allowing people to repost and retweet information obtained unlawfully, a violation of federal law, a felony, ladies and gentlemen. Twitter is complicit in a felony, but they're not, because they're protected. Now that should not be allowed. They should not be allowed to be a participant in the furtherance of a commission of a felony offense. And that's what they did. A federal felony offense, not some local jurisdiction, a federal felony offense by publishing Donald Trump's tax returns. What would be interesting is to see what happens to Twitter based on that. That alone should have been sufficient information to push for this company to be exempted or removed from this protection. Now, whether the law itself has to be rescinded is another question. But these tech titans blocking content that they find objectionable is not acceptable. Now, I'll be the first to point out that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, are there to protect us as citizens from an overreaching government. They do not apply to private organizations or entities. They're not there to protect us from Twitter or from Facebook. But when we grant protections to these platforms in effort to let them grow and develop their business so they wouldn't be facing ludicrous lawsuits all the time because some twit in his basement wrote some pro-Nazi thing or some black supremacy clown wrote some black supremacy thing and put it on their platform, They're protected from prosecution for that. We grant those protections. It does not give them the privilege and right to censor the content of others that they find objectionable. There's nothing in the New York Post article that is factually invalid. There is nothing that is unworthy and not newsworthy. It's factual. The fact of the matter is Twitter and Facebook censored the content in an effort to hide the story about these allegations and about this laptop. That's the fact of the matter. And for 2 weeks in an incredibly important election, Twitter and Facebook influenced the outcome of this election. If Joe Biden wins, how many votes did Joe Biden get because people were unaware of the fact that his crooked, corrupt RICO family enterprise was actually genuine, hidden by the mainstream and lamestream fake media with a collusion of tech titans like Twitter and Facebook, blocking this content from being posted online and people being able to share it to learn the truth, shutting it down so that low information voters have no information. And even those wanting to be informed who stay on top of events couldn't get access to this information. One of the nation's oldest newspapers, a paper that has survived over 2 centuries, founded by one of our original founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton. The 4th highest circulating newspaper in a country where newspapers are dying by the day. Before COVID, and with COVID, they're dropping like flies. Yet the New York Post is around. Why? Because they're a factual organization. And for Twitter, the uppity young upstart that's barely been profitable throughout its history, to determine that their content was unacceptable based on their standards, raises all sorts of questions about how valid the platform of Twitter actually is. But Jack Dorsey needs to answer the question, why did Twitter allow people to repost without any censorship the federal tax returns of the President of the United States, or any private citizen for that matter? That is a felony offense, a federal felony, and they're complicit in that felony. Why do they get away with this? This is not acceptable, folks. For 2 weeks, they've influenced election. And why does that matter? Well, it would matter to begin with in a normal election year. But in this year, in which the states of California, New Jersey, and others are fraudulently sending out tens of millions of ballots to people who don't even exist so that someone can mail them back in with fake signatures, in a year like this, how many people have actually voted? How many votes have come in from legitimate voters who voted for Biden without knowing the full story? And what about the media covering up the story that Tucker Carlson exposed last night with the former Navy submariner who was in business with Hunter Biden, who met Joe Biden? And when Biden lied about him and denigrated him and called him a Russian stooge and Russian disinformation, he decided to come forward. And only Tucker Carlson carried that story. This explosive story exposing the Biden RICO criminal enterprise for what it was last night. His words, exposing them. Why was that covered up by the mainstream media, the fake stream, the lamestream media? Folks, it's very disturbing. People whine about Russia, 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 Russia. Marsha, Marsha, Marsha. Like we're watching the Brady Bunch every time Hillary Clinton opens up her mouth. Her bum hurt. Still 4 years after the fact, not accepting that she lost the election. She lost the election. Arguably, she lost it more than Donald Trump won it. She blew it. And she can't accept those results. Macedonian server farms. I'd be surprised if you could identify Macedonia on the map. The former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia we're talking about, of course. Not the northern Greek province of Macedonia. So to be fair to Hillary, spelled out for her. Yes, 4 years later, still can't accept it. Worried about $5,000 or $50,000 of Facebook ads. If you get your information from Facebook and that's how you make your decision to vote, I suggest you might want to consider not voting. You're not very well informed. You might go to Facebook for some information, but that's where you get the bulk of your information. You're not well informed. Ladies and gentlemen, Jack Dorsey testifying before the Senate committee, telling them that they allowed the New York Post to publish, but they didn't, as Ted Cruz pointed out. The only way they can post it, they go back in and delete the original one and conform and kowtow to the conduct of this upstart tech company in California. Well, folks, there you have it. And I don't know what to say other than that you want to talk about influence of an election. You want to talk about corrupt practices. You can look at the fake stream, lamestream media and what has happened this entire year, this entire 4 years, but especially this past month when they covered up Hunter Biden's laptop story and they've dismissed and ignored the story that Tucker Carlson finally covered for us. Doing the right thing as an investigative journalist. Folks, this is disgraceful. It's disgusting. Jack Dorsey ought to be called on the carpet, and his company ought to be called on the carpet. If I were on the board of directors for that company, we'd have a board meeting very soon. You'd have to explain to us why they tolerate the publication and retweeting of material obtained in a felonious, felony manner, theft, breaking federal law, but they censor one of the nation's oldest newspapers because they don't like the content. Well, folks, if you're not a subscriber to Chris White Africa, I ask you to take a second and consider becoming a subscriber. And if you've thought about it and you agree, just push that subscription button right down there. Be sure to toggle the bell icon so you get notified of updates and my future live streams and prepared videos. And if you want to leave a comment, feel free to do that. And finally, I ask that you smash the like button. Just, punch it right there. Makes a big difference because the more likes on videos, the more likely it is that people find it. The bigger the audience, the more people get the word. Thanks a lot for listening. I appreciate your time, your patience, and your patronage. God bless America. Let's get through this nonsense and keep these criminals out of government.